I am in Vienna, Austria at the Belvedere, a magnificent palace complex that is now home to the greatest museum of Austrian art. The palace was built for Prince Eugene of Savoy, or Prince Eugene of Savoy, a legendary military leader who himself became quite wealthy. He was a genius military strategist who stopped the Ottoman assault on Central Europe in the Great Turkish War, especially after his decisive victory at Zenta in 1697. He was a former member of the French court of Louis XIV, who denied Eugene a military commission, so he fled to the Holy Roman Empire where he excelled, and later fought against the French during the War of the Spanish Succession. At the 1704 Battle of Blenheim, he again quite literally saved the Habsburg dynasty, as France lost its footing in Bavaria and made Austria the dominant power in Italy for the next century. He then fought the Ottomans again in the early 18th century with the Austro-Turkish War, in which he maintained his reputation as Austria's most effective and influential military leader. His original winter palace inside the old city is called the Stadtpalais. It was designed by the great Baroque architect Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach. In 1697, after his victory at Zenta, he bought this land south of the city and hired a different architect to design this new summer palace. Johann Lucas von Hildebrandt largely designed the entire Baroque palace complex and gardens. There are two separate palaces, the more famous Upper Belvedere, which we will visit in this video, and the Lower Belvedere below, closer to the city. The smaller single-story Lower Belvedere was finished in 1716, while the grander Upper Belvedere was built between 1717 and 1723. They are celebrating the 300th birthday of the Upper Belvedere this year. Also, they are installing an odd space capsule art piece into the historic pond directly in front of the palace. The Belvedere Gardens are one of the most authentically preserved Baroque gardens in the world. There are many sculptures of mythological gods and nymphs throughout the beautiful gardens separating the two palaces. Prince Eugene also had a menagerie here, a private zoo full of exotic animals. Unfortunately, that no longer exists. He did have a lion and let it run around freely, and that lion supposedly died on the same night as the Great Field Marshal on April 21st, 1736. He never married, which was unusual for that time. Winston Churchill called him a Mars without Venus, while Eugene said that soldiers should never marry as women are a hindrance in war. He was a major patron of the arts. He absolutely loved artwork and architecture, and had a massive collection of paintings and books. Prince Eugene did not really have a family, and did not leave an official will, so the Belvedere was eventually obtained by Empress Maria Theresa. The Habsburgs turned the Upper Belvedere into their picture gallery. They actually opened their Imperial Gemäldegalerie Gallery to the public in 1781, making the Belvedere one of the first public museums in world history. The paintings that were once here were moved to the Kunsthistorisches Museum in the late 19th century. Kaiser Franz Joseph intended that the now cleared out palace complex should serve as the residence of the heir apparent Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But of course he got assassinated in 1914. The Lower Belvedere was turned into the Modern Gallery in 1903, influenced by the Vienna Secession, so it was an early state-run museum focused on modern arts. After the Great War, the Belvedere fell to the states, and it was decided to turn it into a new expanded museum. The Upper Belvedere was turned into the Austrian Gallery, a museum of Austrian arts, while the Lower Belvedere was converted into the Baroque Museum, with a modern art gallery in its orangery. The Upper Belvedere Palace is truly fantastic. It is one of the most beautiful Baroque palaces in Europe. Also, these sphinxes outside the palace are great. The high position of the Upper Belvedere provides a sweeping panorama over the great city of Vienna. There's the spire of the Stephansdom, where Prince Eugene is laid to rest. The interior of the Upper Belvedere is amazing, especially this entry hall. This is the Sala Turina, which has a vaulted ceiling that is supported by 4 mighty atlases. Originally this hall looked more simplistic, however due to structural damage, the sculptures of Atlas holding up the ceiling were added. They are awesome. There is also a sculpture of Kaiser Franz Stephan in here. Now we are going to ascend the grand staircase. There is a stucco relief depicting the triumph of Alexander the Great over Darius. These contemporary red vases provide quite a contrast to the white stucco. This is the marble hall of the Belvedere, the 2-story grand central chamber of the palace. It is composed of a reddish marble with gilding. The frescoes were created by Italian artists. Prince Eugene had many Italian artisans work on this palace. The ceiling fresco depicts Prince Eugene surrounded by virtues like Justice, who holds her hand out towards him. The paintings over the fireplaces depict animals from the menagerie. In 1955, the Austrian state treaty was signed here in the Marble Hall. Here is a copy of the treaty, which re-established Austria as a sovereign nation after 10 years of Allied occupation. It was signed in this room by the foreign ministers of the 4 occupying powers, including United States Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, as well as Austrian Foreign Minister Leopold Figl, who presented the treaty to the public from the balcony. The Marble Hall was actually damaged by a bomb during World War II. Thankfully, the Belvedere survived the bombing. Now we will start heading through the Austrian Art Gallery, which highlights the development of Austrian art through history with some fantastic pieces. This is the antechamber of the Belvedere, with a ceiling fresco of Prince Eugene as a war hero banishing evil with his strength and virtue. Here is an 1890 Cupid and Psyche. This is an 1875 scene of Vienna's Northwestern Station. It is the only depiction of that train station from that time period. This is a portrait of Magdalena Plack, the wife of Viennese art dealer Georg Plack by Hans Mackart. He was invited to Vienna by the emperor himself, and this was his breakthrough piece. So throughout the 1870s, all the Viennese bourgeoisie wanted a portrait done by him. This is the Latin Bridge at Sarajevo. a commissioned painting of the Bosnian capital, as it was occupied by Austro-Hungarian troops in 1878. This was Prince Eugene's conference room. From 1718 to 1733, he was not directly in the military, as he was a minister of Karl VI and governor of the Austrian Netherlands, now Belgium. This is cool, an 1882 portrait by Claude Monet. It is called The Chef, La Père Paul, an impressionistic depiction of Antoine Graff, who was a popular chef at a hotel in Pourville, France, where Monet stayed for several weeks. This painting was shown at the 1903 Vienna Secession exhibit and was purchased for the Austrian Gallery. Here is a portrait by Secession member Koloman Moser of Rudolf Steindl, the artist's brother-in-law. This is an original terracotta study for the monument to Victor Hugo by Auguste Rodin. That is a fantastic plaster sculpture by the Belgian symbolist artist Fernand Klumpf of a nymph named Vivienne. It's basically an 1896 femme fatale. This is Lost, an 1891 painting by Franz von Stuck, a co-founder of the Munich Secession and one of the most important Jugendstil artists. He was quite influential on the Vienna Secession. These are Men on the Seashore by the Norwegian expressivist Edvard Munch from 1908. Some of his works were showcased by the Vienna Secession in 1904. This is a Crouching Woman by Max Klinger, the same artist who sculpted the famed Beethoven monument at the Secession in 1902. This is titled The Evil Mothers by Giovanni Segantini, an 1894 landscape which addressed the controversial subject of unwanted pregnancies. So this is a very charged painting. And this is an 1895 portrait of Josef Lewinsky, dressed as Carlos and Clavigo, by none other than Gustav Klimt. I have arrived at the most crowded room of the palace, in which hangs one of Klimt's greatest masterpieces. This is The Kiss, an iconic painting that was the culmination of Gustav Klimt's golden period, crafted between 1907 and 1908. Klimt's sensual take on the classic if controversial subject of the kiss was influenced by the Byzantine mosaics that he saw in Ravenna, Italy, along with Japanese prints he so admired. His Beethoven frieze and the Palais Stokely friezes were also influential in terms of the subject matter, as he pursued this unique work just after completing his scandalous University of Vienna ceiling panels. This was exhibited in 1908 at the Kunstschau, and while many of his more erotic pieces were highly criticized by Vienna society in the past, the state actually purchased this immediately before it was even finished, though many still consider this to be rather pornographic. I mean, they are clothed at least. The lovers embrace and entwine in highly decorated robes in the midst of a golden abyss. There are all sorts of flower motifs on the woman's robe, while the man's is composed of black and gray blocks. He made fantastic use of gold leaf, along with some silver and platinum. It is truly impressive to see this surprisingly large painting in person. This is Adam and Eve, another erotic Klimt scene that he painted between 1916 and 1918. He did not touch many biblical subjects throughout his career, but here in one of his final works, left unfinished, he puts Eve in the center as the quintessential female, while Adam is in the background intoxicated by her. So here Eve is the temptress, not the snake. Klimt's Adam and Eve is juxtaposed with a bronze cast of Rodin's Eve. This was Prince Eugene's audience room, where he would host Ottoman envoys in the presence of a prized Titian. Now it is filled with Klimts. This is a mother with two children, also known as Family, a Klimt piece done in 1909 and 1910. This is Gustav Klimt's portrait of Fritze Reidler from 1906. The subject was the wife of a wealthy mechanical engineer, and she is sat on the chair like it's a throne. She also has an expressionless face, as the background dissolves into pure ornamentation. And this is the Lady at the Fireplace, painted between 1897 and 98. It has quite a dark and melancholic tone. The Belvedere has been subject to some of the highest profile art restitution cases regarding art looted by the Nazis from Jewish people. The most well-known example is Klimt's famed portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, the Woman in Gold, which was one of the highlights here at the Belvedere until 2006. Adele Bloch-Bauer's niece, Maria Altmann, made claim for the return of 5 works by Klimt that the Nazis looted from the Jewish family and placed on display here. After a years-long legal process, they won and the Belvedere had to return the paintings. Altmann sold the Woman in Gold to the Neue Gallery in New York City, which does not allow photography, otherwise I would definitely go see it. This is Gustav Klimt's unfinished portrait of Amalia Zuckerkandel. He started this in 1918, but he passed away that year before it was finished. It exemplifies how he would start with the faces in his portraits. The sitter was murdered as a Jew by the Nazis at Belzec, and this work did have restitution claims by both the descendants of the Zuckerkandels and the Bloch-Bauers. However, the Austrian Supreme Court ruled against restitution in a controversial case. This is a portrait by another unique Viennese artist, Egon Schiele. It is a portrait of the Rainer boy from 1910. This is a self-portrait by Koloman Moser made in 1915. He was a multi-talented Secession artist who worked in a wide variety of mediums. There is a great collection of Gustav Klimt landscapes in Prince Eugene's former picture cabinets. This is the Forester's house in Weissenbach on the Ottersee, painted in 1914. Klimt spent the summer of 1914 in that lakeside house in Upper Austria. This is a 1907 work called Sunflower, in which he utilized a little bit of gold leaf. Here is the cottage garden with sunflowers, done in 1906. Notice how Klimt's landscapes are on square canvases. And this is an Upper Austrian farmhouse by Klimt. These are Fishermen on the Seine near Poissy, an 1882 landscape by Claude Monet. This is an awesome Monet painting, The Path in His Garden at Giverny, a 1902 scene of the beautiful gardens leading up to his house. This painting was purchased by the Belvedere in 1942 from a collection in Berlin, which may have gotten a hold of it under shady circumstances, so it is currently being assessed for potential restitution. The Belvedere usually displays a great Van Gogh landscape, the Plain of Auvergne, but I got to see it at an exhibition at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. In this painting, Marie Bashkirtseff depicts a Paris suburb in the fog, as it looked in 1882. This work by an early influential woman artist was shown at a major exhibition here in Vienna in 1910. This is titled Spring in the Prater. It is Tina Blau's largest work and undisputed masterpiece. Olga Wissinger-Florian's Falling Leaves is a classic late 19th century scene of the Vienna woods. This is the Laughing Self-Portrait by Richard Gerstel, made between 1907 and 1908. He was a tragic young artist. He did not have many friends at the Vienna Academy and refused to show his work in public, even though he developed a distinctive expressivist style. He did have an affair with the famous composer Arnold Schoenberg's wife, who then abandoned Gerstel, so the 25-year-old struggling artist stabbed and hanged himself in his studio after burning most of his papers. So this is a haunting portrait as he painted it in the same year he killed himself. This is a 1905 portrait by Richard Gerstel of the sisters Caroline and Pauline Fay. This is an excellent portrait of Edward Kozmak by Egon Schiele. The subject is sitting in position like he's a hypnotist. And this is the facade of a house, known as Windows by Schiele from 1914. The side of the house entirely fills the canvas, so there's no telling what the surroundings look like. Here's a peek inside the chapel, which is closed off to visitors. Now we will head back in time with 19th century Austrian realist arts. This is a portrait of a freight forwarder at the port of Trieste from 1835. The Belvedere just purchased this in 2022. This is the spreading pine tree in the Brühl Valley near Mödling, an 1838 landscape of a popular day trip spot from Vienna back then. Here is another 1830s landscape called the Waldkapelle, the Forest Chapel, an idyllic rural scene with worshippers at a chapel in the mountains. This is the Return of the Herd by Michael Netter from 1844. This is a fantastic small scene by the Romantic German painter Caspar David Friedrich, titled The Rocky Landscape in the Elbe Sandstone Mountains from 1822, depicting the gates of Neurathen Castle near Dresden. That is awesome. This is Thomas Enders' landscape of the Pastors Glacier, which he painted on a trip to Austria's largest glacier with Archduke Johann. There's a classic bird dome taxidermy display, an interesting inclusion to the art gallery. This is titled Exhausted Strength, a great 1854 realist study in lighting, as the picture is lit by just one candle. You can barely make out the exhausted mother asleep on the floor next to the baby's crib. There is a framed flower arrangement. That was a fairly common craft of upper middle class women. This is one of the first genre pictures of 19th century Austrian painting, A Girl in Front of the Lottery, made in 1829. This is a family portrait of businessman Rudolf von Arthuber with his children. They are positioned in an unusually close arrangement for that time. This is an iconic portrait of Napoleon at the Great St. Bernhard Pass by Jacques-Louis David. This huge 1801 propaganda piece, intended for display in Milan, depicts Napoleon as a mighty warrior leading his troops in the campaign to conquer Piedmont and Lombardy. The names of Hannibal and Charlemagne are written in the rock outcropping below, along with Bonaparte, of course. Napoleon did include Prince Eugene in his list of history's top 7 generals. Honestly, if Prince Eugene lived later and teamed up with Napoleon for the French, they may have been unstoppable. Some ceilings still have their original release from Prince Eugene's time. This is the Militiaman's Departure, made in 1813. In this piece, the Landwehr militia group departs to fight Napoleon. They did play an important role at the Battle of Nations. This Karl Schindler piece depicts a rural recruitment, displaying the concern of relatives about losing their sons, but also the loss of critical labor at their farms. Here are hussars being billeted from 1836. This room did house many of Prince Eugene's favorite paintings. Most of those are now at the Sabata Gallery in Turin. This is a 1790 landscape of the Great Waterfall at Tivoli, which is near Rome. It was painted by Jakob Philipp Hackertz, who during his time in Italy gave drawing lessons to Goethe. This is a mid-18th century portrait of a Hungarian court chancellor and his family. These flowers purposefully depict the diversity of plants, as classified by Linnaeus in the 18th century, so this is somewhat of a scientific painting. Here is a 1706 Fowl and Rabbits. There are really interesting busts in here, called character heads. They were sculpted by Franz Xaver Messerschmidt between 1771 and 1783, and he made 60 of these busts exploring the range of human emotions with different facial expressions. These busts are fantastic and quite unique to the late Baroque period. This was Prince Eugene's game room. He was an intense card player. Now the room is filled with 18th century paintings. This is Christ and the Captain of Capernaum, painted in 1750 by Franz Anton Malbirch. Paul Troger's 1750 Mount of Olives is an incredibly dramatic scene expressed through the chiaroscuro and reduction of the figures. This is Samson's Revenge, an interesting piece by Johann Georg Platzer. This was the dining room of the Upper Belvedere, which used to have huge grotesque ornaments on the walls and ceilings. There are busts of Empress Maria Theresa and Franz Stefan. These are 4 vultures of different kinds. This one was owned by Prince Eugene. He hung it above the door to his bedroom here in the palace. I have ascended to the upper level, where visitors can peer into the marble hall from above. There is a fantastic view of the gardens and the city of Vienna from up here. The Prater Wheel is visible in the distance, as well as the Danube Tower. There is more modern Austrian art up here. Unfortunately, they do not allow photos of a majority of the works, including all of the kokoschkas, which is quite odd. They really should repeal that rule. Most visitors don't notice and it's just a nuisance. Guess it gives the guards something to do. A famous painting that I imagine is usually displayed up here is the Tiger Lion by Oskar Kokoschka. I got to see it in Paris at an exhibition at the Palais de Tokyo. This is the Lady in White by Gustav Klimt, another one of his unfinished paintings that was found in his studio after his death. This is Solitude by Carl Mediz. Koloman Moser did this study of clouds in 1913. This is The Legend, a painting by Adolf Hölzel. This is just intended as a pictorial composition, not a religious motif, which is what anyone thinks at first glance. And here's a female head by Hölzel. This is a fascinating work of Egon Schiele. Death and the Maiden, painted in 1915. Existential themes like death and transience often appear in his works. So here a man and woman are captured from different perspectives in unstable poses. He did paint this in the year he separated from his longtime muse. So the man, a self-portrait of Schiele, stares blankly into the void. This is The Last Human, the final sculpture of Anton Hanak, aiming to express the sorrows of the Great War generation. This is a portrait of Victor Ritter von Bauer, done by Egon Schiele in 1918, the year he died. These are portraits by Alexei von Jawlensky, including a self-portrait on the left. This 1923 piece is called The Mountains of Klosters, painted by Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, the former leading figure of the Die Brücke German Expressivist movement. Lovis Corinth was an unusual German painter during the post-war period, as his works were usually bright and colorful, despite the gloom and doom of the times. That's an abstract composition from 1933. This is a work by the Czech surrealist artist Jindřich Stursky. Rudolf Walker's 1932 still life with two heads is a good example of new objectivity. Max Beckmann sought transcendental objectivity with his paintings after his sobering experience as a medical orderly during the Great War. This is called Reclining Woman with Book and Irises. This is a work by Wilhelm Toni. It's a view of Manhattan from the East River. This Austrian artist moved to New York in the 1930s and decided to stay for obvious reasons. However, the majority of his oeuvre was destroyed in a warehouse fire. This is a figural expressive study by Helen von Taussig. She came from a prominent Jewish family and converted to Catholicism in the 1920s, but was still murdered in the Holocaust. There is an exhibit of 12th to 17th century Austrian art, which used to be part of the Baroque Museum at the Lower Belvedere. That is a Tyrolean wood-carved crucifix from the late 1100s. This is the Sonntagberg Madonna, which was located at a pilgrimage church in Lower Austria, created by an Italian trained sculptor in 1360. This is a late Gothic stained glass window. This is more so a collection of Central European arts, as it was all part of the Austrian Empire at one point or another. This is fantastic. The Znaim altarpiece, the large late Gothic altarpiece, represents a three-dimensional crucifixion scene with its original polychromy. That is The Odd Couple, a small 1530s portrait by the German master Lucas Cranach the Elder. This is the St. Catherine altarpiece, which also has some classical details, that was made in 1520. Those are shrine figures from the high altarpiece of St. Blaise's Church in Abternau. That is a 1521 hardwood carving of the Fall of Man. Here is an early work of Lucas Cranach the Elder from 1502, the Stigmatization of St. Francis, which he painted here in Vienna. And these are the wings from the altarpiece of Cron Church made in 1510. Don't skip out on this exhibit. It may be small and off to the side, but it has some interesting pieces. Now I have walked through the gardens to the lower Belvedere. It was home to the Baroque Museum for a long time, but now it is primarily used for special exhibitions. I got to see the Klimt, inspired by Van Gogh, Rodin, and Matisse exhibition here, which analyzed the different artistic influences on Gustav Klimt. The flagship Klimt exhibition is featured in a different video that is linked in the description. But let's head inside and take a look at the Belvedere's 300th anniversary special exhibition in the Orangery. There are several staterooms in the lower Belvedere that are preserved to their glorious 18th century appearances. The largest room in the palace is the Marble Hall. Just like the Marble Hall in the upper Belvedere, though this one is smaller. Guests were received by Prince Eugene in this imposing chamber with frescoes, reliefs, and decorations by Italian artists. The ceiling fresco is the apotheosis of Prince Eugene. The general is surrounded by mythological gods, including their messenger, Mercury, who brings Eugene gifts from the Pope, honoring his 1716 victory over the Turks at Petervoordijn. The prince is surrounded by allegories of fame and strength. The relief over the fireplace shows Venus in Vulcan's forge. And on the other side, Vulcan's weapons are given to Aeneas. The Marble Hall is actually located right in the middle of the Klimt exhibition. And in the back there is a sculpture, also called the Apotheosis of Prince Eugene. It is considered as the most important sculpture of Balthasar Permoser from 1721. Eugene is portrayed as a latter-day Hercules, and the slave at his feet is actually a self-portrait of the artist. Despite the severe flattery, Prince Eugene apparently did not like this all too much. This is the Groteskensaal, the Hall of Grotesques. Grotesques were a popular style of highly detailed decoration in ancient Rome, with a mix of mythological and natural figures. The central hallway is fantastic, with the wonderful red marble and stucco ceiling reliefs. And this is the golden room of the lower Belvedere, with its golden walls, mirrors, and grotesque paintings. This is pretty incredible. We are now going to head into the orangery of the palace, currently hosting the Belvedere 300 exhibition, featuring a variety of pieces from the collection, telling the story of the palace, which went from being a grand home of Austria's greatest general, to one of the first ever art museums. This scene depicts Minerva with Kaiser Joseph II, pointing towards the upper Belvedere, essentially telling the emperor to display artwork in the palace. Joseph II is considered as one of the enlightened despots. This is a portrait of the great general himself, Prince Eugene of Savoy, who has a black page next to him holding his ceremonial armor. That is a vertical Gustav Klimt landscape from 1898, called After the Rain. It was the very first Klimt work to enter the Belvedere collection in 1900. This is the last contingent, which used to be on display at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, but it was transferred to the Belvedere collection along with many others, as it is by an Austrian artist. This is a plaster bust by Auguste Rodin, which he donated to the Vienna Secession for their 1899 exhibition. And that is a bronze sculpture by Edgar Degas. This is Egon Schiele's portrait of art historian Franz Martin Haberditzel, who was the director of the Belvedere Staatsgalerie from 1915 until he was forced out by the National Socialists in 1938. This is Egon Schiele's portrait of his wife Edith, made in 1918. She is sat in the same chair as the one we saw in the director's portrait. This is another Gustav Klimt landscape, Schlosskammer on the Attersee 3, which was one of several works donated by Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer to the Austrian Gallery in 1936 in memory of his wife Adele, who had died in 1925. This is a fantastic 1936 landscape by Oskar Kokoschka of Prague Harbor. He exiled himself to Prague in 1934 due to fascist developments in Austria by that time, but the Belvedere Staatsgalerie purchased this from him in 1937, just a year before its organization. This is a portrait of Bruno Grimschitz, who was appointed as curator of the Austrian Gallery after the Anschluss of 1938. During his tenure, the gallery obtained many pieces through rather unethical means. This scene depicts the signing of the Austrian State Treaty in the Marble Hall of the Upper Belvedere. This is The Embrace, Lovers 2 by Egon Schiele from 1917. It was purchased by the dealer Heinrich Reiger from Schiele himself, but after the Anschluss of Austria, Reiger's collection was Aryanized, and this was purchased for far below its value, and later Reiger was killed in a ghetto. On the left is a portrait by Alexei von Jawlensky, an important German expressivist, formerly part of the Blaureiter group, but the Belvedere no longer purchases non-Austrian art. Here are two figures by Maria Lasnig, one of the most important post-war modern Austrian artists. This is a still life with 5 bottles by Vincent van Gogh, painted in 1884. It's a study of light as reflected through the bottles. This is Vienna Revisited 2 by Gerhard Frankel, a Viennese artist who was expelled in 1938, but returned and tried to reconcile with his hometown. This is the view from the Upper Belvedere as he saw it. Here are some medieval pieces from the collection, including the Martyrdom of St. Vitus from 1470. This painting was confiscated by the Gestapo and displayed at the Reich Cultural Chamber. The Belvedere had to buy it back after a 2015 restitution case. Here is a commentary on the infamous Woman in Gold restitution case. At that time it was viewed as a big cultural loss for Austria. And this is The Ship of Fools, a unique 1923 painting that was commissioned by the Austrian Gallery as a commentary on interwar Austria. People like Klimt and Schiele make cameos in here. I must say this exhibit is well done. I actually really enjoy the focus on how the museum acquired these pieces and why they are important to the collection story. It was a good retrospective on the sometimes troubling history of collecting. And here's the garden of the Lower Belvedere. It appears the global warming warning space capsule has been put into place in the middle of the pond. This is a much better way to bring attention to the issue than moronically tossing soup at irreplaceable cultural heritage. So that was the Belvedere, the incredible palace complex of one of history's great generals, now home to some fantastic and historic artwork. And even the museum story is quite intriguing. I would highly recommend visiting for yourself. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider taking a look at my other videos featuring art museums, exhibitions, historic places, and much more across Europe and the United States of America. I do have many other videos on Vienna's history and attractions, including the one on the Klimt exhibition here at the Belvedere. That really was interesting, so make sure to check that out. It is linked in the video description. Also, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Hoosier Tours for more. Thanks for watching!